Well, if we take Glaucon at his word, and then after him Adeimantus, who jumps in and says, moderation and justice are fair, but hard and full of drudgery, while intemperance and injustice are sweet and easy to acquire, and shameful only by opinion and law. Then both Glaucon and Adeimantus have this deep-rooted spiritual disease. They have a vision of the world that makes their whole worldview dark. Remember that in the story of Gyges, where Gyges in some ways is Glaucon and Adeimantus, Gyges goes down into this dark chasm, this vesica piscis in the earth, and it's a reversal of nature. But in going down into that dark place, he's going down into what we would call hell, Tartarus, Sheol, what the Greeks called chaos, the first pit out of which everything emerges. And in many ways, he never gets out of that pit. He's still stuck in there, because mentally, when he comes out with the ring, he's ready to do awful things. So he never really gets out mentally of that dark pit. And I would suggest that Glaucon and Polemarchus and Adeimantus are all in that dark pit as well. Now, what is the other metaphor or myth where we have a dark pit and being trapped in it that we've seen already in another one of the dialogues? That comes later. What's the other dark pit? Underground. Lethal. Can't get out of it. The labyrinth. Very good, Miss Duff. The labyrinth. It's underground. It's a tomb, essentially. And it's being trapped in there where you meet the Minotaur and it devours youth. It devours human flesh. Why? Because I think facing this issue devours one's innocence. It devours your youth. If you honestly grapple with the question of whether or not humans are fundamentally evil, if you honestly grapple with the question of whether or not justice is the way to go, if you honestly grapple with the very idea of whether or not there's a God or an afterlife, you'll come out of it eventually, but it takes away all that innocence that you had as a kid. You can't be the little happy kid that believes in Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny anymore. You become something of an adult. To put it another way, it's an absolute necessity to go down into the dark valley, down into hell, down into Sheol, if you are going to mature. There's no way around it. If you avoid this issue, or if you try to escape from this issue without going down into that thing, then you don't actually mature, Plato suggests. When we come out, if we come out, like you said, if we come out of that dark place, we then have a certain power, which is adulthood, that allows us to do one of two things, either act for the good or for evil. But it's that whole knowledge, that whole wrestling with the thing that will give us that ability. And I asked the question earlier, what is the ring? And I never answered it. The whole ring image, in my estimation, is really the polytropic power to be able to see behind the curtain, the construct that everybody else lives by. If everybody else lives like sheep, not questioning anything that they do, the person who questions why we do what we do, down to why do we worship a God? Why do we worship Jesus and not Buddha? Why do we kneel when we kneel? If you're questioning those things, then you have a power that most other people don't have. You have an ability to see above the herd that most people don't have. Now, what you do with that power is your free choice. You can choose to take that power and use it to help other people, to craft images and artwork that inspire, to teach, to lead politically, to lead by example in family life. Or you can choose to use that power to destroy, to annihilate, to take other people's goods, to strip them of their happiness and joy. But it's ultimately it's your choice, and that's why Gyges, who when he makes the choice to rape the queen and to take over the kingdom, is making a bad choice. It's not one that everybody's going to make. It's the choice that he makes that is really key to the story. Kim. Well, I think he comes up, but mentally he never comes up again. He never is resurrected again mentally. It'd be like Lazarus coming out of the tomb and never really becoming human again. He's just like a walking zombie almost. Yes, absolutely. And it is possible for somebody to go back down mentally. Yes, Odysseus does go through that. And Socrates himself suggests the very thing later on. that the person who's been down there and uses this for evil never gets out of it mentally. The person who comes out and uses it for good has to frequently go back down into it, painful as that is, because he has to keep reassessing his own position, but he also, and this is striking to me, he also has a necessity to find other people and bring them out. It is incumbent upon anybody who's seen the difference to try and release other people, like the Matrix. You got to flush the guy out of the tube or whatever. Although that's, but it is incumbent upon the guy who's seen the difference to actually go back and try and bring other people back out again. And as he says later on, it'll be a job where they drag someone else kicking and screaming out of the darkness because the person is so comfortable in the darkness they don't want to get out of it. Well, Socrates says, how do we answer this question? This is a tremendously difficult question. And he says part of the problem is that we don't see the human soul as easily as we should. Why? Because partly we are a human soul. We are a human person who's soul and body. But partly also because the soul is so small that we can't see it well. It's like our vision is dimmed by darkness, so we don't see the human soul too well. And consequently, he says, in order to see it, we need to make a metaphor, an image. City parallels soul. And the construct of the city, he says, is very much like the construct of an individual person. Consequently, if we look at a city in speech, we might be able to see a parallel to how the soul is constructed. If we find justice in the city, we'll find justice in the human soul. And that's why he then does this thing that I have on the board over here. Right? He's been challenged already by Glaucon and by Adeimantus to prove that justice is good for its own sake and for what it offers. So he says, let's construct a city in speech to do this. Let's make an extended metaphor, because the metaphor of city will parallel the fact of soul. In a city, he says, you have three divisions. And he begins to flesh those out for us, so I'm just cutting to the chase here. You have three divisions in the city. There are the workers, there are the guardians, and then there's a type of guardian that he calls the rulers. They're part of the class of guardians, but they do a special job. Those three classes then make up the three tiers of the city. And it's not about who's better there, because rulers can't survive without workers, and workers can't be controlled, can't be ordered without rulers. All three divisions have to be there. So before anybody goes off on a tangent or listens to Neoplatonists who say that the rulers are the best and the workers are slobs, we get rid of the workers, that's great because the body sucks. That's a load of hooey. Plato never seems to suggest that. He suggests that all three divisions are necessary within the soul. You might ask, perhaps, why those three divisions? What does that have anything to do with the soul? The answer that he comes up with later, that he'll share with us later, is that in the soul there are three divisions as well. And we prove these by saying, look, we have an appetitive drive. You have a part of us that is desiring of sleep, desiring of sex, desiring of food, desiring of power. And that desiring part can be overpowering sometimes. But it certainly keeps us going. I mean, it's the desiring part that makes the whole human machine work. Well, you have then a part that says, don't do that. That wouldn't be wise now. Eating 50 Twinkies right before the big game would be a bad idea. Okay? That's the rational part, because the rational part is always thinking in terms of what's best, what's good, what's appropriate. How do I conform to this ideal or that ideal? And this thinking part, or rational part, tends to govern over our appetitive part. We frequently put one appetite away so that another appetite can take over, or we put all appetites aside so we can follow something else. And so he says there are two parts at least to the soul. There's that reasoning part and there's that appetitive part. And then he says there's a third part to us, which basically is the way that the reason governs the appetite. In the Christian realm we call that what? Conscience. What is conscience? Conscience. It's with knowledge. Conscience. And the conscience is the part that basically governs the appetites by the reason. It's what he calls the high-spirited part. It's that part of you that commands the appetites. Look, you want to sleep? Too bad. You got an exam. Work. Or it's the part that says, you want 50 burritos, keep it to 3, buddy. That high-spirited part commands the appetites through the reason, with science that it does so. And consequently, it says there are definitely 3 parts to the soul. Now, if you're very perceptive, notice that what he's just done is he says, look, you got this soul thing, and there's at least an appetitive part, and there's a rational part. And in between has got to be this high-spirited part that commands the 2. The cut is obviously the golden ratio that he's doing, yes. That the 3 parts of the soul are dependent upon that golden ratio. And so he's cut the city up according to that mathematical figure again. Same figure we saw in God Gets This Ring, same figure we saw at the opening of the work, same figure we saw in the Euthyphro. And Socrates is suggesting it on the one hand in order to see justice written large. That's the point. He wants to see justice on a large scale so that you can see it on a small scale of the soul. So the construction of the city, which in Greek is the polis, which in the Latin translation becomes the res publica, the things of the people, and therefore the republic, which is the name we use now. The construction of this republic is for one reason only. It's to see justice writ large. Now, of course, that examination of justice serves a higher purpose. The higher purpose is that he has a job here like a doctor of saving his interlocutors. All of his interlocutors, all the guys he's speaking with, have a spiritual disease. They see the world darkly. They don't believe that there's actually a God. They don't see a reason for doing goodness at all. And Socrates sees this as a spiritual malady. So on the one hand, creating the city is in order to see justice writ large, and on the other hand, it's in order to get his interlocutors out of this dark labyrinth. And what's really striking to a feller like me, who's fascinated by mythology, is that the way that he gets them out of this dark pit, out of Tartarus, out of chaos, is not philosophy. It's not theology or doctrine or dogma or rules. It's myth. The construction of the city is essentially a long myth. It's a story. And he saves these guys out of this labyrinth, out of this dark pit, by the construction of an artwork. A piece of artwork is what saves them. It's the clue that gets a person out of the labyrinth, that they hang on to this artwork rather than hanging on to a philosophical argument. I find that truly remarkable, because if that's the case, then we could say a similar thing about any form of salvation. The movement from darkness into light, from hopelessness to hope, is not a philosophical argument. It's rather, it's a myth, it's a story, it's an image that gets us from point A to point B. That's a truly remarkable commentary, I think, on the nature of artwork and myth. And everything that he does after this is going to be part of this creation of a myth that ends up saving or tries to save these guys. Whether they choose to recognize it or not, it's up to them.